So I would like to welcome Tracie right this time, and she's with the Hope Immigration Law Firm. She founded it, and just very proud to be her friend. So with that, welcome Tracie Morgan.
Y'all are so tall. There we go. How's that? Is this good? So thank you so much for having me here. As Becky mentioned, my name is Tracie Morgan. I grew up here. I went to Derby High School, class of '97. My English AP teacher is here, so that's extra nerves for me right now, no pressure. But I moved to Atlanta about 20 years ago, where I live with my husband, Bill. And about 12 years ago, I founded Hope Immigration. And we're a small but mighty law firm. We focus on family and humanitarian immigration. Our primary focus within that, though, is working with survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking. So I'm a lot of fun at cocktail parties with small topic conversation about all that good stuff. So again, thank you so much for the welcome. I'm also a little bit nervous to present in front of my dad and stepmom. I'll do my best to make you proud. So,
can you turn up the mic a little?
I know, I have a little voice.
A big heart.
Aw, shucks, thank you. So this is my strategy, right? I have the immigration officers underestimate me. They're sweet, she's kind, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm smart. So here we go. What we'll talk about today is we're going to talk just a little bit in general about what happened in the past with Trump, things that we know might be coming. We'll talk about the quick changes that he can make on day one with immigration. Then we'll get into kind of what you hear a lot of in the media, the mass deportations, the threats to take away birthright citizenship, and then denaturalization. I'll do my best to get through this in about 40 minutes, but it's a huge topic. And I have my contact information, Becky has it as well, so if there's follow-up, please, please, please let me know. I do have a flight to catch at about 5:30, so I will have to bolt.
3:30 questions, just for your information. I forgot that.
No worries. Yeah, so here we go. So 2025 is not a repeat of 2016. Trump is a lot better prepared than he was 8 years ago. And I'll just start off, I think that this is a very friendly crowd, but I am not excited about a Trump victory and what the future holds for us, so I will be biased. I will fully admit that in my presentation. But I will lay out what we know, what we anticipate to happen, and try to do that in as clear a way as possible. So obviously Trump has Project 2025, his roadmap for what he wants to do to tackle the issues of the day. But when it comes to immigration, there are a lot of ideas, but not a lot of details. We'll talk about that with the mass deportation in a little bit, but we do know that he has a long wish list. What I will say too is that in general with Trump, under the last administration, I felt like he would bark about 10 different things. He might actually implement 2 or 3 of those things. One of those things would get held up in court, so you would get 10% of the really bad stuff. But because 10 things were announced, we were all going in different directions. How are we going to handle this? What do we need to mobilize here? Which ones of my clients do I need to contact about this thing? And it was chaos, and it was exhausting. And what I have learned is that we need to focus on the facts and what is actually put out there, and not think about all the rumors. Because if we do that, if we focus on all the rumors, we will be too exhausted to fight the fights that we really need to fight. So that was just my take, and that's how I'm trying to handle going into this next Trump administration. Trump wasn't prepared to become president, right, in 2016. But now he is. His administration, his transition team, they've already identified 54,000 federal employees already there who are loyalists, who are going to be in these agencies, who will be given promotions, who will have a microphone extended to their ideas, so that they know that the Trump administration can rely on those people to implement their plans and policies quickly. They didn't have that before. We also have a lot more vulnerable people in the United States now than we did in 2016. So we've got temporary protected status, which has been around for a very long time, and for countries like El Salvador, that population's been here for 20 plus years. But we've added new countries. We've added Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, Ukraine. this population totals about 1.5 million, and TPS, temporary protected status, is one of the things that is on the chopping block under Project 2025. We have 500,000 people, some say closer to 600,000, with DACA. This number has remained consistent because under the last Trump administration, they kind of had a bastardized version, so to speak, of getting rid of the program, where it got held up in the courts so that no new applications could be accepted. That's what the court ruled, but people who had DACA could continue to renew. We're waiting on a Supreme Court decision this upcoming spring about the legality of the DACA program in general, but that's 500,000 people who are our teachers, they're in law enforcement, they're our neighbors. So I think it's going to be really curious to see how the administration handles DACA, which is again something that they have talked about wanting to get rid of. We have 2.7 million asylum applicants in our country. Again, this number has doubled in the last 8 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about the logistics of that and how that gets so complicated. But asylum applicants are in the United States legally. It doesn't matter if they're swimming across the river, encounter ICE, and they say, I'm seeking asylum from Guatemala, for example. That is perfectly legal. They are allowed to be here. So again, this is a population that I think gets demonized a lot, but they are here with status. We also have a question of who controls immigration, right? We've got the federal government, which traditionally has been known to hold the power when it comes to immigration. And within that, we have Congress. They're supposed to be making the rules, making the laws on this. But Congress hasn't done anything since 1997, when I graduated high school. And then we see the executive branch trying to step in and kind of put band-aids on immigration where they can. DACA was an executive order President Obama created in 2012. Then we have the executive order that Trump put in. He put in a few, but the big one, of course, was the travel ban, the Muslim travel ban. Those, so far, have been held to be like perfectly fine for presidents to do. But we'll see, how much further the executive branch can go when it should be Congress taking action. We're also looking now at states trying to get involved in immigration. We have a little bit of that already with different programs where if you are encountered by local law enforcement here, they can run a check on you with immigration to see if you have status. If not, they can refer you to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, for deportation proceedings to commence. Well, that requires bed space in local communities and cooperation from local law enforcement. And, one of the things that Trump did in the past was that he would say, I'm going to withhold funding from these so-called sanctuary cities that may not refer to ICE, and that way it's kind of a lure for getting states to cooperate and do more with ICE. We also see states like Texas, Operation Lone Star, where they've created a state misdemeanor for someone to be in their state who doesn't have legal status. They say it's a trespassing charge. They've prosecuted 50,000 people. They've spent millions of dollars. Not super efficient. But so far, that's been allowed to progress. Down south in Oklahoma, the governor says he wants state judges to be able to issue deportation orders. That has never ever happened. It's been immigration judges who are under the Department of Justice. And so they'll be curious to see if that goes anywhere. And then just this morning, I saw an article about a Missouri state representative who wanted to start to put bounties on immigrants to say, if you report an illegal immigrant, we'll give you $1,000. Again, these are things that are super scary and we should always be aware of, but these haven't happened. We want to squash them, and I think squashing them earlier is best. But again, it's not one of those things where I'm going to be out there telling my clients about this. So again, just stuff to be aware of, and then just trying to do our best to control the chaos, put our energy where we can. So in immigration law, we actually have laws, and then we have policies. And with the law, that is Congress, those are things that are ensconced. Like, I am a US citizen, I marry someone who's not, I can file a green card petition for them. Policies are set by the different agencies. And this is where you get into kind of the insidiousness of the system, because, okay, well, what does that process look like? What forms do I have to file? What do I have to show in terms of the amount of money I make? What do I have to show in terms of my criminal background, the spouse's criminal background, if any? And so that's where I think we're going to see A lot of changes with immigration. It's going to be with the policies. So on day one, what can Trump do at noon on January 20th? Well, this one gets into the weeds a little bit, but I think this really shows how Trump can really influence immigration in ways that don't make the news, but impacts a ton of families. So a lot of people might think if you get married to a US citizen, that's the golden ticket, you're fine, get your green card, life is good. That's not the case. If the foreign national entered the United States illegally, they cannot get a green card here in the United States. Their punishment, even if they entered as a baby, even if they have DACA, is that they have to return to their home country and obtain an immigrant visa to return. Well, they were also in the United States for a long time without permission, and so what they have to do is apply for a waiver of forgiveness. Well, that waiver of forgiveness will take about 4 years to process. Right now, this was a policy that President Obama set saying, well, you can apply for that waiver before you leave. So when you leave, you know you're only going to be gone for a week or two. Then you're going to come back with your immigrant visa, and you're going to be great. Well, it's a policy. That's going to change. Trump is going to change it, and this is, just what we're hearing from his transition team. So you can no longer apply for that waiver in the United States ahead of time. You're going to have to return to your home country, then apply for your waiver, then wait 4 years in your home country to get your visa to come back. So those are the types of changes that I think are really going to impact immigration that you won't hear about in the news because they're not glamorous, they're not the big ticket items. Something too that Trump will get rid of is travel permission for DACA recipients. And this plays into the waivers as well because a lot of DACA recipients did enter the United States as itty-bitty children. And when they marry a US citizen, they're like, okay, I want to get my green card. I'm sorry, you can't, you gotta go through this long process. But there is a way for them to travel. They can get travel permission from US Citizenship and Immigration Services, come get the travel permission, leave the US, come back. They don't trigger any bars, they don't have to do the waiver, and voila, they have a legal entry to the United States. They can get a green card. Within 14 months, life is good. Because they can travel. And that travel permission went away under Trump before, and I anticipate it will go away again. So these DACA recipients are going to be stuck doing that 4-year waiver process. And when you're talking about a 4-year wait, it's like, who has the capacity to do that? You're, dealing with families that are torn apart. You have families who are returning to a home country that they haven't been in, may not even speak the language. Maybe dealing with, financially supporting 2 households, one here, one there. So, yeah, that's one of the changes that I worry about as an immigration lawyer. I think Trump will also work really hard to slow our legal immigration system down. Currently, about 80% of all green card interviews are waived. That means, the application gets looked at and adjudicated, relatively fast process. Now, with Trump, he's going to require everybody to come in for an interview, which is what he did before. You're looking at delays of 1 to 2 years just because the number of officers just isn't high enough to conduct an hour-long interview with somebody on these cases. So that's going to, increase the backlog. I'm also hearing that, throughout the federal government, Trump and his team want federal employees to return to the office. Well, about 60% of immigration officers work remotely. There is and there are 6 service centers with USCIS. One of them is fully remote. So what does that mean? They're going to have to purchase a building and then get that fully staffed up and running with all the resources there. I think we're going to see federal employees decide to retire or quit, find a new job. So mass attrition. We're not going to have the officers that we need to do the adjudications. So I'm very curious to see what comes with that. I also think the administration is going to be really petty when it comes to immigration policies. Under the last administration, without telling anybody, they suddenly said, if you file an application with a blank box, we're rejecting it. They want us to put NA. Okay, fine. And so most applications have to be mailed in. So you're dealing with a postal system that's not great. But by the time it gets returned to you, it might be 4 to 8 weeks later. You've missed a deadline. In an asylum case, if you don't file within the first year of being in the United States, you're toast. So that got to be a really big deal. We're also going to see officers start to review not just the case before them, but if there were prior immigration filings, those are going to be under scrutiny as well. So they're going to be told to look for fraud in every single case. And again, this isn't new. This is what we saw before. So now we're prepared for it, and we're going to be able to make sure our clients aren't prepared just for one interview, but potentially 2 or 3, because they're going to be asked to go through that old information as well. Under the prior Trump administration, cases could be rejected for anything, not just the NA issue, but let's say, oh, you forgot to include a copy of your marriage certificate, or maybe it wasn't the right version of your marriage certificate, or maybe you did include it, but then in the mailroom at USCIS, it fell out. And they would just deny cases outright, instead of issuing a request for evidence, giving you a second chance. And at that point, if it's denied, you've lost your money. Like they said, we looked at it. And just so you know, a green card application based on marriage, you're looking at over $3,000 for one person. So if you're a family, that's going to hurt a whole heck of a lot. Also, I will get happier, I think, I promise. Under the prior Trump administration, every single denial technically got referred from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to Department of Homeland Security to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to do removal, deportation, and start that process. Now, in working with the vulnerable populations that I do, prior to Trump, I would tell them, hey, yes, let's apply for this visa as a victim of trafficking. As long as you don't have a criminal history, you'll be fine. If the case is denied, they're just going to put your case on a shelf and forget about it. Because they want to make sure that people feel secure in applying for these benefits. Well, under Trump, he's like, nope, there's no longer that protection. It doesn't matter how sad your story is. If it's denied, we're going to send your case over to ICE so that they can start deportation proceedings. So that will happen as well. We'll see these denials move over that way. Work cards. Work cards are a lifeline for the immigrant community. I know in Georgia, you can't get a driver's license without a work permit or a green card or being a U.S. citizen. Well, under the Biden administration, they extended the validity of work cards for some applicants up to 5 years. Well, under Trump, they were short. They were like 1 year duration. Well, a work card costs $520. So if you're looking at having to apply every single year, as opposed to every 5 years, that adds up quickly. There's also delays in processing. If it's taking, 6 months to adjudicate, you've got to plan ahead 6 months to get your application in. And if you don't have a valid work card, you shouldn't be working, so that's going to be a huge headache for a lot of folks. And then, under the Trump administration as well, we had issues with public charge. So typically when someone is coming to the United States, they have to have a financial sponsor to show that they won't go on like Medicaid or obtain food stamps until they become a U.S. citizen. And that burden has always been on the sponsor, the U.S. citizen spouse, for example. Well, one of the things that Trump did was he said, oh no, we want to know if the immigrant themselves can support themselves. So we want documentation about the immigrant's education, their English ability, their age, their health, and it was really to weed out like the elderly, the sick, the people who weren't going to be in higher level employment. And so, yeah, that was a real downturn in family immigration because people are like, I want to sponsor my parents, but my parents can't self-support. I'm sponsoring them. So I think that's going to be another area that we see impacted under Trump really, really quickly. All right. Now, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Let's talk about mass deportations. There's so many unknowns on this, right? We don't know how this would happen. And number one, who is at risk for mass deportations? Who's actually undocumented? Because I'm looking at a case, I file a case for someone who's applying for a visa for a victim of violent crime who cooperated with law enforcement. Currently, it's going to take them 18 years to get approved. They have a receipt to show that they're in process, but does that mean they're documented? They don't have a work card, but they're going to be at risk under the Trump administration, even if the case is filed. Or let's say that you've, oh, I don't know, I'm gonna skip that example. But it'll be really hard to figure out who's gonna be at risk. Now, the new borders are, he has said, we're gonna target criminals, and that's great, that's what the Biden administration does right now. But then, who are these criminals? Well, it could be someone who's pulled over for, speeding or having a broken taillight. We saw a lot of this 8 years ago. Driving while brown. Then you get a broken taillight, you get pulled over. Oh, let me see your license. Oh, I don't have it. And then they start to run the checks, and they realize you're in the country illegally. And that's when they can then refer you to ICE and start deportation. And so you'll hear talk about someone getting deported because of speeding. And it certainly, it can start that process with removal proceedings. There are about 13 million people in the United States undocumented. And I think in the handouts that I have about Kansas, there are numbers towards the end of that talk about the number that are undocumented here. And 5.1 million kids nationwide live with someone who is undocumented. And 4 million people in the United States live with at least one person who's undocumented. So it's a large number of people who will be impacted. And again, thinking about, there was a Trump interview that's being aired today that Bill and I were looking at, and he's like, well, families are just gonna have to be deported together. It's like, well, you can't deport a US citizen. But I think what he's getting at is that families will then self-deport because you'll have parents who are in the United States undocumented. And then they're gonna have these minor children, they don't know what to do with them. The kids are US citizens. Well, they'll either have to find someone that they can stay with in the United States, which is a huge lift, a huge emotional trauma for the entire family, or the kids are going to have to return to the home country. And I think that's what he's talking about when he says families of mixed immigration status will be deported. I don't think you can actually give a deportation order to a US citizen. There will be no discretion. So let's say that the person driving with the broken taillight is a grandma who has leukemia. She's the only care provider for her 5 grandchildren. ICE doesn't care. They'll still deport her. That's what's different with the Biden administration, is that there is a lot of discretion. They could look at this grandma and say, hey, you're not supposed to be here, but it would be a bigger burden on society if we were to remove you. And so again, as long as grandma has a clean record, they will let her stay. But under Trump, that won't happen anymore. There's also talk, so pardon me while I get a little geeky here about removal and deportation. Those two things mean the same thing. Just because someone gets arrested doesn't mean they're automatically put on a plane and deported. And I think that's an important thing to know when you're thinking about this whole thing and the panic that Trump creates. Immigrants, even if they're here undocumented, have due process rights. Now, what the Supreme Court and the courts in general will do with that, I don't know, but as of today, there are due process rights. A lot of people have ways to fight to stay in the United States. If they've been here for 10 years and have US citizen family members, they can fight to stay. If they've been victims of domestic violence, they can fight to stay. And so the immigration court process right now is horribly long. What we're looking at is currently 3 million court cases are in the deportation pipeline. And again, this doubled from 2016 to 2023. There are only 659 immigration judges nationwide. And if you do the math, which I didn't do, I relied on the American Immigration Coalition to help me with this, that's 2,840 cases per judge. Well, if you're looking to add 13 million cases to that docket, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? I mean, the average wait time for a deportation hearing is over 700 days. So talking about just the economics of doing an actual deportation case is really going to be tough. It's going to be an extreme amount of money that's going to have to be put into the justice system so that people can get their day in court. Now, also with deportation, you're looking at, well, can you actually deport the person? There are some countries that won't take deportees from the United States. Russia, China, Cuba, Cambodia, for example, also, they will not take US deportees. But what we saw under Trump was that he created like mini travel bans against countries that wouldn't do this. And he would say, okay, you know, Eritrea, for example, you're on the bad list. You're not accepting deportation flights, so we're not going to issue any visas to any of your citizens. And lo and behold, Eritrea has changed its tune real quick and said, okay, we'll take a few. And so then visas opened up again. So there are tools that the administration will have. So we'll see what happens with that. Now, how do you arrest 13 million people? Heck if I know. Just looking at the numbers in general, you're gonna have to have about 300,000 to 400,000 new law enforcement agents to handle that number of arrest. Even just to arrest 1 million people per year, ICE would need 30,000 new agents to do that. So again, I'm having a hard time seeing Trump's dream of mass deportations come to fruition simply because of the numbers. You're gonna have to find a place to put people, right? Because if you detain them, one of the things that Trump has really talked about is like, okay, so this person was detained, but you released them to wait for their immigration court hearing. Then they committed a crime, and that's horrific, yes. And then what do? You know, that person then is going to be put into the criminal justice system as they should, but then Trump's argument is that person should never have been released. Well, how are you going to find bed space for 13 million immigrants? And I was like, well, how on earth, like, what's the numbers like? What do we currently have? There are 2 million people currently incarcerated in the United States. Are you going to kick them all out to make room for illegal immigrants? I say that tongue in cheek. So they're going to clear out local jails potentially, looking at maybe building new detention centers, because there are detention centers throughout the United States. I believe there are about 45 currently. But to build enough space, bed space to hold 13 million, it's going to be $168 billion. Is the public going to be okay with that? Maybe. I mean, I'm surprised they're okay with a lot of things right now. So we'll be curious to see how if that takes off. We've talked about the immigration court backlog. Again, there are no resources to actually go through the legal court system to deport that number of people. So the impact, you're looking at an annual cost, just to kind of break it down, of deporting just 1 million a year, just a fraction of what Trump wants. $7 billion to arrest people, $66 billion to detain them, $12.6 billion on legal processing, so the immigration judges, the ICE attorneys, because in deportation court you've got the immigration judge, you've got the ICE attorney, and then you've got the immigrant with their lawyer. And by the way, there is no right to counsel in immigration court. So even if you're a 5-year-old, you may be on your own. There are a lot of great nonprofits, we'll talk about a few at the end. But yeah, and then $2.1 billion to physically remove the flights to remove people to their home country. We're going to look at a loss of $22.6 billion that get paid into the system of Social Security. People do work who don't have legal status. They have Social Security numbers. They may have obtained it a while back when it was still easy to do so. It's not as easy now, but they're paying into it. And we're going to lose out on $5.7 billion being paid into Medicare. The industries that are going to be harmed, no surprise, we're looking at the construction trades, agriculture, where about 1/3 of the population there, of the workforce is undocumented. Housekeepers, that's about 1/4 of the population there that's undocumented. And then the hospitality workers, 14% of the people who work in hospitality are undocumented. So, number one, if they go, who fills in the gaps? But are they just going, underground and doing other work, or are they just leaving for greener pastures, maybe moving up to Canada? Who knows? And then just our GDP loss, we're looking at, a declination of about 5%, or about $1 trillion over the process of removing 13 million undocumented immigrants. So there is that. So I think this is an area where we will see a lot of hype, a lot of bark. I think things will start to happen, but then the courts will get involved. I will say that immigration lawyers, we are prepared to litigate and gunk things up in the court system like we did before, because that stymied a lot of Trump's plans. And I think the public's not gonna have it when you start to like, oh, you're deporting my neighbor, you're deporting my nanny, my landscaper. Once it gets personal, people get fired up. So we'll see what happens. Moving on to denaturalization. So what is denaturalization? Somebody becomes a US citizen by birth. We'll talk about birthright in a little bit. Denaturalization does not apply to them. Naturalization is the process of going through USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and applying for your naturalization. Now this is after you've already had a green card, so you've been a permanent resident for a certain amount of time, and now you've taken that final step to become a U.S. citizen. That should be like the final thing, like you have security now, you are a U.S. citizen. We don't have different classes of U.S. citizens legally anyways. And so what Trump did under the first administration that he had was, he talked about, oh, I want to go back through and look at denaturalizing people, maybe people from certain countries. Nigeria was a big target. And the reasoning was, well, if they committed fraud in any of their prior immigration applications for their visa to come to the United States or their green card or the actual naturalization application, we want to take away their naturalization. They shouldn't have gotten it in the first place. And there's this really interesting Supreme Court decision where U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, had started the process to denaturalize someone. And they were talking about, okay, well, what's fraud? Because the application asks for a lot of information. Is fraud like if you forget to put your apartment number on an address where you lived 20 years ago? Maybe. And then Justice Elena Kagan's like, was it fraud if I lower my weight? Like if I say I weigh, 200 and I really weigh 250 or whatever? And like, oh, no, of course not, that's fine. But that's the question, right? Like, what is fraud? Is it something that would lead to a different decision is basically where it came down to. So a difference in someone's weight or forgetting your apartment number shouldn't lead to a different decision. But the Trump administration will, of course, try to exploit that and say that's grounds for denaturalization. But really, only the federal courts have jurisdiction to finally remove somebody's citizenship. So, and that the government's burden is to be clear, unequivocal, and convincing with their evidence. And so now you're looking at backing up not just the immigration court system, but possibly the federal court system as well. And also, when someone denaturalizes, it's not like they get deported, they become a permanent resident again. They take a step back, but unless the Immigration Services actually starts deportation proceedings, they're still in the U.S., so you spent all this money and resources for what? But really, again, it's about the impact of the words. It's going to chill the community. People are going to be reticent to file up for naturalization, or they might be scared to file a petition for a family member because they're like, oh, I'm a U.S. citizen, but if I file for my spouse now who's not, is immigration going to look at my case again? Did I do everything 110% correctly? I don't know. So I think that's going to be an area where we see some issues as well. Then ending birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment. Again, I think this is just hot air. I don't think that this is something that they can actually do because it's going to require a change to our Constitution or some really fancy legal maneuvering that the courts so far haven't bought into, and hopefully never will. But if we're looking at a constitutional amendment, we're looking at having to have 2/3 of the House and Senate approve it, and then 3/4 of the states have to ratify it, and I just don't see that happening. So again, I feel like this is one of those things that's just talked about to invoke fear. All right. So other issues to look at, I think family-based immigration, you're going to see a reduction on who can apply for whom. So right now, if you're a U.S. citizen, you can apply for your parents, your siblings, your adult children, your minor children, and your spouses. If you're a permanent resident, you can apply for your minor children and your spouses. You can also apply for adult children if they're not married. Well, I think under Trump, he has talked about just really wanting to limit immigration to U.S. citizens sponsoring their spouses and their minor children. So getting rid of a whole swath of categories of people. Typically, if what would happen, and I was talking with somebody earlier, her brothers are in a line, so sibling petitions. If those go away, then I believe the old case should still exist. I mean, they've been waiting over 20 years, but there's just no way to guarantee that, anybody would be grandfathered in. So that's a scary thought. And then the diversity visa, or the visa lottery program, which people have heard about. Again, this is a target of the Trump administration. What the diversity visa does is that it's trying to encourage immigration from countries that aren't well represented in the United States. And so 67,000 people last year became permanent residents under this. You have to show that you have a certain education level, you're from certain countries, no criminal history. But again, I think that's going to be gone, and that's really going to impact, I think, the island nations, as well as a lot of the nations in Africa. So we'll see what happens there. And then asylum, limiting asylum. And I will say Biden has not been great on asylum at all. I have not been excited, and I was not excited about Kamala Harris's ideas on this as well. But like we said earlier, asylum is a legal right. You come to the United States, you don't need a visa. You're fleeing persecution, and you come and you have an interview, and the Customs and Border Protection CBP officer will let you in and tell you will go to court in a few years to plead your case. Well, what happened under Trump was he created a program called the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, or Remain in Mexico, where it didn't matter what country you came from, but if you were coming through the southern border, you would have to, number one, wait in a line to get a number, and then you were told you'll have to wait in Mexico until we can interview you to decide whether or not you have enough of a story to present to an immigration judge. That wait could take months, but then what happened was you now had to wait in Mexico for your immigration court hearing. Now, at the border, they were moving faster. We're talking maybe a year at the maximum, but even so, you were stuck in Mexico with no resources. Mexico didn't give out work permits. People were living in really horrible conditions on the Mexican side of the border. They were easy targets for extortion, sexual violence, all sorts of horrible things. And then what would happen is you would get to the border, you'd have court at 8 in the morning, you get to the border at 5, it's a 2.5-hour line to get processed, and if people would get ordered deported because they didn't get through the border in time. And you can be ordered deported if you're not there for your court hearing. So the return of the Remain in Mexico program is pretty chilling on the asylum community for sure. So, all right, what can you do to combat all of this? Number one, thank you for being here. I think this is an important first step. Stay informed. That's number one, because the more you know, and with immigration, it's so hard, right? Because it's easy to have a 10-second snippet about, immigrants being evil and wanting to do, horrible things to U.S. citizens, but it's a lot harder to get into the weeds to explain the system and to say, well, this is really how it works and why the system isn't that great. I could totally geek out on this for hours, but it's hard to put into a tweet. Put public pressure on, and I can't emphasize this enough. I think the Trump administration was shocked when people from all walks of life showed up at the airports that first week after the travel ban was announced, and it was chaos at the airport. Who can come in, who can't? Can permanent residents come in? Oh, wait, we were banning people from Iran, but what if I'm Iranian, but I have dual citizenship here in the United States? Am I allowed in? And people showed up to the airports in numbers, people who aren't immigrants, people who maybe don't even know that they have immigrant friends, more isolated. But people were just so outraged about what the administration was doing. And I will say as an immigration attorney, that was amazing to me to see other people were interested in the issues, and that it wasn't just those of us who were in this every day who saw the injustice and the inhumanity of the system, but people just could open their eyes and see it and act on it. And so please, number one, number two, whatever it is, just please put public pressure on and be vocal. I think about this past week with Blue Cross Blue Shield, right, saying that they were going to, limit anesthesia on surgery. Huge outcry, right? And then they reversed it. And I think that's where our power is. Our power is in numbers. Our power is in saying what's not acceptable. Support immigrant businesses. There are a lot of great restaurants in Wichita that are owned by immigrants. It doesn't matter their status. They support the community and show that you're just a safe space, someone who's an ally. And I think that's going to be huge as well. Just letting people know that they're not alone, be it the immigrant community, being people who work with immigrants. That's going to be super helpful. And then safety planning. This is not a fun one to think about. But I have been telling my clients, you need to have a plan, especially if you have children who are US citizens. What happens if you're at work and there's a workplace raid and you get sent away to a detention center 3 hours away? What happens to your kids? Do they know what to do? Is there someone who can look out for them? And so we've been creating powers of attorney for our clients just to make sure that they have someone who can maybe access their bank accounts if they need it. To pay for it if they want to, legal services or anything like that. Also, partnering with family law attorneys to say, okay, can you help with these custody cases? Because we don't want the kids going straight into foster care, into the state custody. Number one, even if someone doesn't have a heart, you look at the economics of that, that's huge. But just making sure that people have family planning in place for the worst case scenario. Also looking at connecting with civil rights attorneys, civil violations. We talked about driving while brown. I think our immigrant community friends are going to be harassed left and right and be denied opportunities. And it's like, okay, I may not know the answer to this or how to fix it, but I know somebody who can. So building up your networks is going to be huge. And if you are friends with people in the immigrant community, you want to be that trusted source. I think a lot of us in here have the privilege of being born in the United States, not having an accent, looking like a lot of the other people in our communities, and we've got to be able to use that and leverage that so that we can get into spaces that maybe our immigrant community friends cannot. So that's going to be important. And then volunteer with local nonprofits. The workload is going to be huge, and we can't do it by ourselves. So, in Wichita, we have Catholic Charities. They're an amazing organization. There's the Immigration Law and Advocacy Center on Broadway, I know, and the International Rescue Committee as well. They're over on Oliver, and they do amazing work. And with immigration, you don't have to be a lawyer, right? So you can act as an interpreter. There are also opportunities within asylum where you can go and listen to an asylum interview, a credible fear interview, and you just take notes. You don't advocate, you don't say anything, but you help build the record so that then an attorney like myself can take a look and say, okay, here's where we have a case, here's what we need to do. So there are those opportunities as well. And then I wanted to mention an organization in Kansas City. It's called the Clinic of Sharma Crawford, and we have books. They are on the back table. We have 5 in English, 5 in Spanish. They're for kids. And I hate that this exists, but I'm glad that it does. But it's talking about immigration enforcement from a child's perspective. There's 5 in English, 5 in Spanish. Yeah, English and Spanish. And what they do, what the clinic does, is that they provide legal representation to people in removal proceedings in deportation court. Like we were talking earlier, the immigration court system is very backlogged. It's also not something that a lot of lawyers want to do because it's soul-sucking. I will tell you in Atlanta, our asylum approval rate is 3%. So that's tough. And also, asylum is going to be a lot of work. And so a lot of people can't afford the legal fees. There's no right to representation, so then they go to a nonprofit. Nonprofit might say it's got a year before we can do an intake. And so and these cases are going to be with them for 10 years. So you've got to plan all the case management with that as well. So I will also say removal defense doesn't sound glamorous, and it's always had like a tinge of dirtiness maybe to it, because up until the Trump administration, those people who were in removal proceedings, they have been caught and placed in removal proceedings because they committed crimes. And in immigration law, there's no idea of double jeopardy. It's like you committed a crime, you did the time for the criminal issue, and now you're in deportation proceedings, and you've got to fight again to say why you deserve to stay in the United States. You might have been here for 40 years, you might have family here that rely on you. So immigration immigration court has always been tough to get support for financially because of that. But now I think we're going to see everybody in the immigration community is at risk if you don't have documentation. So it will be the grandmas, it will be the teachers who had DACA that was revoked. And so I do think, removal defense work is so important. So the clinic at Sherman Crawford, they're the ones who donated the books. They're in Kansas City. The Kansas City Immigration Court is where everybody in Kansas goes. We just don't have enough courts to have them where they're needed. In Atlanta, we have 2. No, in Georgia, we have 2. But again, it's just like the need is so immense. So I would highly recommend that as well. So, having said all of that, stick together. I mean, I was amazed under Trump version 1 about the coalitions we were able to form, about the different communities that were interested in helping, and it was heartwarming. I hate that it had to happen, but there were a lot more people out there who were willing to fight the fight and do the good work than we realized. So don't give up the faith. We're out there doing the work. We need you with us. So thank you.
That was overwhelming, wasn't it? Yeah. We're going to open up for questions, and please be respectful that they do have a flight to catch, so she's doing this, jamming it in. So at 3:30, I'll be cutting off questions, and gosh, that was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for this talk. I would have a lot of questions, not all to answer, but and of course the question about the costs of all of that might be, and you gave us at least a glimpse, and also the question if, let's say, Trump, I think, also was planning to deport people to countries which are not the countries of their origin. That also might be some other issue. And I don't want to go into that, but I have just one question, might be very too simple, but can you explain in legal terms what is an undocumented immigrant?
All right, so the question is, what is an undocumented? Oh, yeah, I gotcha. What is an undocumented immigrant? Depends on who you ask. You ask 3 people, you're going to get 5 answers. Typically, when you think of someone who's undocumented, they've come to the United States without a visa or passport. It's called entry without inspection. We call it EWI, and they've never applied for an immigration benefit in the United States. There are also people who entered with a visa and then overstayed, and they're also undocumented because they don't have a new status to fall back on. And then you're going to have a whole new group of people who've had status, like temporary protected status, DACA. You're going to have that revoked and they'll be undocumented as well. I would also argue that people who already filed and are in the system should not be considered undocumented, but that's a legal argument. I think Trump's administration will try to say that just having something filed is not protection and that they're still undocumented, but that's where the gray area is.
Sorry for the semantics, but undocumented means, well, they're paying taxes, and so they are not completely undocumented.
So people who live in the so the question was about taxes, like people undocumented are, this is the distinction paying taxes to kind of summarize. If you live in the United States and you buy anything, you're paying taxes. You buy groceries, you buy gas, you're paying taxes on that. So maybe they're not filing a tax return, but also a lot of undocumented immigrants will get a taxpayer ID number so that they can pay into the system. And that is legally the correct thing for them to do. Traditionally, the IRS and immigration don't talk to each other. There's actually a law that says they cannot because the government cares more about their money than caring about immigration status. And they wanted people who maybe lacked a social security number to feel like they could file their taxes and pay into the system. So taxes alone doesn't designate whether someone's documented or not. All right, I'm going to start with my dad just because I'm biased, but then I'll get to the others.
Okay, so in your crystal ball, I think the violent agreement is that violent criminals need to go back over in deportation. I think everyone's in violent agreement about most of that. So when do you think that they're going to start straying over to, like you said, driving with a broken taillight, what we would consider minor, or, going after 30-year residents who, members of the community, good people. When do you think they're going to stray from the violent criminals over to the rest of us?
So the question was about enforcement and, when the focus is on criminals, that's great, as it should be, but then what about the folks who get caught up in the system because, they got pulled over for a traffic violation? Under Trump version 1, there was no difference between someone who committed murder and someone who drove with a busted taillight. They were all treated like fast track them out of the United States as best as you can. No discretion at all. So it's just a matter of being, unlucky, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, meeting a law enforcement agent who, just goes outside the bounds of their authority and starts asking immigration questions, and voila, you get stuck in the deportation system. So I don't think there is it'll be day one.
So even the first year, there'll be a mix of,
Yeah, and then I don't think that the people, like the grandmas and the young folks who maybe don't have removal orders or criminal history, I don't think that they're going to target them and go after them proactively, but I think that once they're in the system again, that they're going to be treated just like everyone else. All right, I'm going to start over here.
I got a question and a secondary question about the humanitarian parole
Yes.
program. My mom and I had put in an application on June 30th, 2023 for a Venezuelan couple and their 5-year-old who were living in the outskirts of Bogota, Colombia. Theirs had not been processed. Immigration put a stop processing around, I believe, August or Labor Day, or is that hopeless? I assume that program's going to be canceled, or?
So questions about humanitarian parole, which has been a really great program when it works to bring people over for a short amount of time to work and gain self-sufficiency and escape some really bad situations. And you were sponsored by people here in the United States who would help you. If they're not here by January 20th, I don't think it's going to happen. I think these parole programs that were created to help Ukrainians, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Cubans, those are going to be tabled pretty quickly because they are executive orders. So the president has the power to create and the power to take away. So hope isn't dead yet. I would, contact Congress, your elected officials, and see what you can do to push that case forward.
Secondary question: people that are already in the country on parole permissions, is it possible they can have that revoked and then they'll be deported?
So people already in the U.S. with humanitarian parole, what happens if parole gets revoked? So no, I don't think the programs will be renewed. I think they'll be allowed to expire on their natural date. I don't think they'll be shortchanged. But then immigration has their information. They can, if they think that they have the time and the resources, can then start to go after people. But again, this is where you get to the question of resources, because if ICE is really focused on the criminals, then they're not going to have time to go look through all these old parole applications or DACA applications and say, oh, this person now has no status, and we're going to go after them. I think they're going to be lower on the priority list, but again, if they ever come into contact with law enforcement, then things are going to get real dicey real quick. All right, in the hat?
When it comes to being pulled over or being interviewed by police, what's a good tactic for them to deter from them being found?
Yeah, so I should have brought them. These are great resources. They're called Little Red Cards, and if you actually Google Little Red Card and ICE, they're Know Your Rights cards. Available in many different languages, and it talks about what to do if ICE comes to your house, your workplace, or you get pulled over in that situation. So you don't have to show your ID to law enforcement. You can decline that, but then of course you get the human element in, and how much back and forth. But it's too where it gets dangerous, because then you're going to start talking about collateral damages, because if you're a passenger in a car that gets pulled over, are you suddenly at risk as well? Well, certainly you haven't done anything wrong as a passenger, so you definitely don't need to share your ID with law enforcement, but again, they can be pretty coercive, and you're gonna feel inclined, and then suddenly now your immigration status is going to be evaluated and tracked. So, you know, be polite but firm, like know your rights, and get those little red cards, share them with the community. They are a game changer.
Where are those, where can you get those?
Just Google little red cards, and again, Bill, will you look that up for me? Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, Blue?
Yes, thank you. I live in a retirement community, and there's quite a few of the grannies there who are from Syria, Lebanon, various Middle Eastern countries. I'm pretty certain that their kids came over here, brought them over. I've met some of their grandkids. I don't know how, you know, I said to one of the grandkids, Trump is a bad man. I want to watch out for your grandma. I don't know how to start going about checking in to find out if these people need any help, because I don't know their immigration status. I just know they're there. I know they don't speak very good English, but I know they're excellent cooks, and I will never starve.
I love it. So I think this is where you have to go the extra mile and become their friends, because people are going to share their immigration status with strangers. It's so personal and so politicized right now that you'll need to find a way to communicate that you are a safe person, that you care about them. And then, like you said, you know, talking with their children to say, how can I help? Like, if this happens, let's say a horrible scenario, like I can't imagine why there would be a raid at a retirement community, but let's say there is, and immigration status gets checked, say, I want to be able to help them navigate this. Like, what can I share? What can I show to show that these grannies have legal status and are documented in the United States? And I think, again, it's just about planning, being proactive. You hope to never need it, but it's good to have the info. All right?
Okay, I have two questions. One, please, if you could explain the so-called 10-year law.
Yes.
And the other one, my husband and I have been supporting a family, a mother and 3 children from Honduras for the last 9 years. 2 born here, 1 came across the border with them. They crossed illegally, but they immediately, reported, and she's been in the asylum process for 9 years with the cases postponed, and with the worst of luck, it is now scheduled for like January 25th. Her lawyer at Sherman Crawford is advising she withdraw that application. It's based on domestic violence, nobody really thought there was a great chance of success anyway. I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
All right, so the 10-year bar, or the 10-year thing. So there's a lot of miscommunication within the immigration community what this is. If somebody is in the United States for 10 years, has not had any interaction with law enforcement, they've been here kind of undercover, they don't have a criminal history, and they have a U.S. citizen spouse or child that would suffer extreme exceptional hardship upon the removal of that family member, they can apply for something called cancellation of removal. And it's something you can only do in immigration court proceedings. You cannot do it proactively. The standards are extremely high because anytime you tear a family apart, there's hardship. What they're looking for is basically like life or death issues. But what happens is once you apply for it, you're able to get a work permit. And so a lot of times the immigrant community hears, oh, the 10-year rule, I can get a work permit. They don't think about the long term, like I'm gonna be in court for the next 5 years. Who knows what the laws will be like and what my chances of success will be, because they're generally pretty low. Something ridiculous, like only 3,000 cases a year nationwide can be approved for cancellation of removal. So that's the 10-year thing. And I also have a case of a gentleman from Cameroon who had an excellent asylum case. I was excited to go to trial for him. He was scheduled for November 20th, a week before. Well, it's just poof off the calendar. Not scheduled for a new hearing date at all. And he has a wife who's in Cameroon and he can't bring her over until his case is resolved. And I'm hoping that his case does not get put back on the docket for at least 4 more years. Meanwhile, he has a daughter also that he's never met in Cameroon. And, you know, with asylum, with any really court, you're dealing with the Department of Justice. And it's not like traditional court where you have precedent and it's established and it takes something like the Supreme Court to reverse it, like we saw in Roe v. Wade. In immigration court, the immigration judges are more like bigwig administrative officers. They're not Article III judges. So they are subject to performance reviews and the whim of the Attorney General. And the Attorney General is like the chief immigration judge who sets the policies. Under Trump, the Attorney General said, hey, we're no longer allowing domestic violence to be a claim for asylum. Under Biden, it came back as a grounds of seeking asylum. Still a hard case to win, but at least there was an open door. So under Trump, probably that the chances to go for asylum based on domestic violence are going to go way down. With something happening on the 25th, I'm not going to say, you should, ignore counsel's recommendation. Maybe the 25th, things haven't changed by then. Maybe the focus is elsewhere, but it's super tight, super scary. And if she's denied, she has a removal order. She can appeal, but it is a really tricky situation. So I would definitely stay in touch with the lawyer and have a real heart-to-heart. All right, gentleman in the back. Yeah.
I'm the back.
You're back.
Your mom and dad are very proud of you, by the way.
Aw, thank you.
And what is the percent of the nationalities that make the sweep of 11, whatever the numbers are? What is the nationality? Everybody assumes they're from Mexico.
Some
No,
are.
I think they're not. I think you're
So I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but between like 40 and 45% are originally from Mexico. So that is the vast majority. And then you're just going to have a hodgepodge of elsewhere. The Southern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, they're going to be big ones as well.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
of course.
What? Okay. I have a friend. She is married to someone in the system. He has the green card. What documents do you tell your clients that they need to have on them at any given time in case they should get stopped or over?
That's a really good question. What kind of documents should somebody carry with them? Well, if they are a green card holder, they should always carry their green card, the original. Have a copy somewhere safe. And if it gets lost, stolen, whatever, apply for a replacement ASAP. If you are a naturalized citizen, you have a certificate of naturalization, and you should hopefully also apply for a U.S. passport. I would keep those handy. Keep a copy in your glove box. Because just, you can't tell if someone's a U.S. citizen just by looking at them, no matter what certain news agencies might say. So there is that. Now, if somebody has a case in process, carry the receipt on them. You carry it in your wallet, carry it in your purse, because the receipt by itself isn't a get out of jail free card, but it does go to discretion and it shows inequity. It shows that you're trying to do the right thing. And if you get the right officer, they'll say, okay, you're trying to do this. We're not going to spend our resources on you. You're already being processed. We're going to spend our resources on someone who has nothing in the system yet. So receipts, green card, work card, copy of a passport or certificate of naturalization. Yes.
Somebody on Zoom is asking, do you have any resources or templates you recommend providing to families and individuals who may be impacted to help with safety planning? And this is from the Manhattan area resettlement team. They also ask, have you heard anything about potential limitations on numbers of refugee visas as happened under the previous Trump administration?
Did you guys hear that question?
Not entirely.
No.
All right, so templates for safety planning, child custody, power of attorney. I know my limits. I am an immigration attorney, I'm federal, I can practice anywhere, but I can't do family law. So I wouldn't be able to provide a template for child custody in Kansas, for example. So I would talk to a family law attorney who understands immigration very well for that. Now, I do have templates for power of attorney. That's pretty general statewide, but again, I would recommend talking to someone local for that. Now, for refugees, the United States traditionally has taken in, around 150,000 refugees per year. This was a big topic under the Trump administration, which was ridiculous because refugees are the most vetted immigrant population in the United States. But for whatever reason, that was the targeted population. They're an easy target because they are vulnerable. And under Trump, a lot of the refugee agencies, they were gutted because the numbers were so significantly reduced. And they have just rebuilt up their infrastructure, and it's heartbreaking to see all these agencies trying to think through how are we going to survive another 4 years of this, because we're going to see a significant reduction in refugee resettlement in our country. And I shudder to think what would have happened with our allies from Afghanistan had that happened under the Trump administration. We took in 80,000 Afghan refugees. And would that have happened under Trump? I don't think so. And then I think about what they would have been dealing with life under the Taliban, people who had been, training with U.S. military, who had been women's rights workers, people who had worked in the press, covering the political situation there, and they would be dead, honestly. And so, as global crises unfold, looking at Syria, looking at the situation in Sudan, what's going to happen with them? And I think, the U.S. will just turn a blind eye, unfortunately.
I have two questions, and one I can ask later, but I think it came up with the trafficking violations. But the reason is to criminalize, let's say, some of this, because they're the same category, and also maybe the criminalization of immigrants, which is another issue. But I would like to target this more specifically, and we know possibly very well that who is pulled over for traffic violation. There's a kind of racial profiling in the police, and some colleagues are here working on that too. So my question is, and I think it was floating several times already, what is the role of racism in, let's say, some of these issues that you're dealing with? And of course, we know the previous Trump administration, and we know what white supremacy is supposed to look like, or might look like in 2025 project. So what is your, maybe that's a personal question, but I would like to hear what your judgment is in terms of what does the role of racial profiling play in immigration?
Yeah, so the role of racism in immigration, it's so tough because, as a lawyer, I'm trying to deal with the issues right in front of me, with the paperwork, with the facts, but I do see it. I work with clients, and I mentioned Nigeria earlier. I think the fraud detection unit in Atlanta, that they are all over the Nigerian cases, thinking every document is fraud, that it was, a counterfeit document, divorce decree, passport, whatever. And I can't say why that is, but they have definitely been targeted. And I think, too, that you'll see the Trump administration target people from like from Haiti. We know what Trump thinks about Haitians. So you're going to see, well, Puerto Ricans we don't have to worry about. But I definitely think you'll see populations targeted directly, and they're not going to hide it. But on the day-to-day dealing with immigration officers, on the whole, they're decent human beings. These are people who aren't political appointees. The political appointees are the people at the top giving the direction. But the people making the decisions, they've been doing this for 5, 15, 30 years, and they want to do the right thing. And I relied on them a lot under the last administration to do the right thing, and they mostly came through.
So you're saying trust the process?
Trust the process, but be wary.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I'm a DACA recipient, and my lawyer, I recently got married in October, and she said to try and get my residential thing filed as fast as possible.
Yes.
So as another immigration lawyer, is that still right? If naturalization is getting tougher, Do I do it now?
Yeah, so good question. Do you go ahead and file now, knowing that your case probably won't be adjudicated by January 20th? But then you've already got your stuff in the system when things might be more difficult. I agree with your attorney. I'm telling people file now because the process will get more difficult after January 20th. They will, want to do, looking at your finances, doing the affidavit of self-sufficiency, the 9444, horrible form. You don't want to deal with that.
That begins January 20th.
That likely will begin.
Okay.
If you're already in the system, you won't have to deal with that. You're gonna,
In the system beforehand, I'm still eligible to get sponsored, right?
yes.
Oh,
Yes, so you're gonna have the old laws applied to you even after January 20th if you apply before January 20th. You'll be grandfathered in.
okay.
You'll likely have an interview, so today, if Harris had won, I would say you probably won't have an interview. But now you will, that'll be one change, but that's just process. And it'll take longer, but you'll have done it under the older, easier system. Yeah, of course. Yes.
I have a very general question. Why is this all happening? I mean, I always thought that America welcomed immigrants, that we were a country of immigrants, and now suddenly we don't want anybody who doesn't look like us, sound like us, talk like us. What happened?
You got me. I don't know what happened. I think the immigrant community, they are typically a silent community. They are not going to go out and assert their rights because, number one, they may not know their rights. That's what I hear a lot of. I had kind of an awakening when a client of mine who'd suffered domestic violence horribly, she's from India, and I said, did you ever call 911? She's like, no, I had no idea what 911 was. And it's just like, you just don't know. And so they are just, it's such an easy population to target because they're not going to speak out. They're not going to assert themselves. And they're scared that if they do assert themselves, they're going to be targeted for deportation. Like I look at my clients who are trafficking victims. Why did you stay in this situation? Well, they threatened to call ICE and have me deported. And then like, that was really worse than like living in a house infested by cockroaches and working, 14 hours a day for $5 a day. And in their minds, the threat of deportation was just so significant and so scary that they were willing to do some really awful things and survive that. So I don't know where we've turned our back to our immigrant roots. I think that would be a question for someone way above my pay grade who studies different things, but yeah, it's where we are.
I should point out, though, that immigration originally was limited to Europeans.
That's true.
In fact, Chinese were barred from immigration.
Yeah, our first immigration law was the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Because we talk about the welcoming country, it was mostly from Europe and white people.
Yes. How are the coming changes likely going to impact international students and international researchers at US universities? The higher education system in the US, of course, heavily depends on international participation. And in my department at Wichita State, it's about half the graduate students and half of my colleagues, and I myself am an immigrant.
So, you speak to my heart when you're talking about international students. I did my master's at KU on international studies and my thesis, and this was in 2002, so right after the 9/11 attacks, the impact of international students on campus, because there was talk back then of shutting down the student visa program because some of the terrorists on 9/11 had entered on student visas. And here we are again, all these years later, having the same conversation. And it's scary because, like you said, so many of our universities rely on international students as researchers, as scholars, and even just, in terms of, paying out-of-state tuition. Like, that's a huge boon for the universities. And so what we'll see, I think you'll see this more at the consulates when they're going for their F1 visa interview. You're going to see a lot more scrutiny. When you're applying for a student visa, typically what you have to do is you have to show you have an intent to return to your home country because it's a non-immigrant visa. And I think the consular officers are going to be really honing in on questions like, okay, so you're coming to Wichita to study engineering. What are you going to do afterwards? Well, a lot of students are hoping they're gonna get a job here, or maybe fall in love and stay and build a life here. But that's not what the consular officers are gonna wanna hear. They're gonna wanna hear, I'm going to return back to my home country and, get a job, find a company, and then, build up resources there. So I think that's where it's gonna be a lot harder to get visas. Like, they're not gonna shut down the program, but it will be harder.
Tracy, there's a gentleman in the back that had asked me in Spanish. He said he didn't understand exactly what's going on and why this has changed, because Donald Trump's wife is an immigrant. His in-laws are immigrants. And what was the societal change is what this question was, why?
Yeah, and I mean, Vance's wife, right? I heard she's from a family of immigrants as well. So, Trump won the election because of the border. Like, it stoked all these fears, it rallied people to him. And I don't think he cares about his personal life. Well, he doesn't care that he has the personal story, right? And there are a lot of questions too about Melania and how she immigrated. There's talk that she came on, the so-called Einstein visa, which I will say is a bit of a misnomer because it is allowed as well for international supermodels. There are all sorts of crazy immigration categories, like goat herders have their own category. Models also do it, but it falls somehow in line with geniuses as well. And don't ask me. So, yeah, I think, it's one of those things that immigrants will come to the United States and then maybe want to shut the door behind them. Looking at the exit polling, the Latino population that voted for Trump was a lot higher this time around. And it's, you talk to people, and I talk to, clients and former clients, and they're like, yeah, the people who are coming across the border now, they're poor, they're dirtier, they're somehow different or lesser than. And so they, close the door behind them. Don't want to ruin what they have.
In answer to that, I have a friend whose daughter is married to a young man whose father, I'm guessing, I don't know for sure, I'm not sure that he has status here. His mother does. And he's got all these, he happens to have, this young man happens to have voted for the blue ticket. Okay, but he has many relatives who voted for the red ticket. And the question was, why in the world did you do that? And their answer was, they were told that if you were a good family person who had a job and is working hard, they're not going to bother you. And this came out of churches.
Mm-hmm.
And so they thought, oh yeah, we're safe. And I'm taking the little red thing, I'm taking it back to her to share with them because they're going to be, I just fear they're going to be in trouble.
Well, I don't understand, because I also look at this issue with tariffs. It's like you can say the facts as many times till you're blue in the face, no pun intended, but people just don't want to understand, or they have just been fed this lie for so long they can't imagine anything else.
I have one question.
Okay.
The Congress or the President changed the law, the immigrant? The Congress or the President?
It should be Congress, but Congress is absconded. They've given out their...
It's the Congress, not the President.
Mm-hmm.
The President is abusa de su poder,
Power.
Sí, abusa de su
Yeah, support the power, yep.
Yep, so the president should not really be involved in immigration policy. But because Congress hasn't done their job since 1997, presidents have tried to fix the system or change the system in different ways. And that's not how it should be. It should be Congress. I completely agree with that. But that's not where we are, unfortunately. And I think it's just a matter of, working with our elected officials to try and get something passed like we had, just 6 months ago.
Can you ideate a bit on who you think the most likely groups to face mass deportation could be? I think I have a loved one who's a DACA immigrant. You would think they'd be lower on the totem pole if the government has their information, right? So I hear about workplace raids. What's the priority order? Yes.
So priority order for mass deportations. Number one, I think it's gonna be people who already have deportation orders. They're the low-hanging fruit, that's easy to go after. Again, like we're talking about, people will have deportation orders, but they don't get put on a plane because, one, their country wouldn't take them back, or there are health issues, or other humanitarian issues at play. And they go on, they're called orders of supervision. It's like parole or probation, where you go and check in with an officer every so often. When those people go to check in after January 20th, they're not going to be released. They're going to be detained and then put on a plane because they've already gone through the system. They have the deportation order. That's going to be number one. And then number two, you're going to have people who have the criminal history, who are, either in our jails currently and have ICE holds or detainees on that. I think that'll be the second population to go after.
Is having entered the US illegally part of being criminal?
No, entering the United States illegally by itself is not a crime. It is a civil violation, just like speeding. So there's some comparison there. Now, if you enter the United States illegally a second time, that's a big issue. Or if you re-enter after a deportation, that's where it's a federal crime and you can be detained and prosecuted for that.
What's the difference between a crime and a civil violation?
So, difference between a crime and a civil violation. The civil violation is like a slap on the wrist. You shouldn't have done it. I think about like homeowners associations and like your grass is too tall. Like that would be kind of the equivalent in the court system.
You get fined.
You can't get fined. It's like speeding, running a red light. I wouldn't say I'm a criminal because I sped, right? But if you speed, you hit someone, and someone's injured, and now you're facing criminal prosecution. Maybe you were drinking at the same time. So that's where it gets to be a crime. It's more severe. You can do jail time for civil. You don't do jail time for.
So if under Trump last time people were getting deported for civil violations, then what's the difference now if being here illegally is?
So entering the United States without permission is not a crime. And so the question is, okay, so if you enter the United States without permission, and then down the road you get pulled over for, driving with a broken taillight, how does that lead to deportation? Deportation is not a criminal penalty. It's civil. It's a civil penalty, like paying a fine would be. Now, of course, the consequences are way more severe, but that's the way that our justice system has envisioned it. So you're not going through like the criminal court system. Again, there's no right to counsel. There's no rules of evidence in immigration court, for example, that there would be in a criminal court hearing. So yeah, you're being civilly prosecuted, I would say, is what the deportation is. It's not criminal. Deportation is not a criminal proceeding.
Can you go back to your list now? You had said 2 was people.
Yes, sorry. Thank you for the reminder of the list. So the people who are in removal proceedings, criminals, and then I think, and I'm curious to see what Trump does with this. I do think that the people who have their status revoked through executive orders like TPS and DACA, I think they're actually at a heightened risk. Because immigration has their records, they know where they live, it's an easy population to go after. Now, I think this would be a huge mistake because the public outcry would be huge. But then part of me wonders, is that what we need in order to get him to not do it? So we'll see, but I do think that they are at risk. Yes?
How do we fight this disinformation? Like, I saw Trump on TV today, and he has this lie about there's 35,000 murderers who are here, and the journalist says, well, that's over a period of 40 years. No, it's not. It's just erased. Or that during the campaign, there's 20 million, 22 million, maybe 45 million illegals, he said. And we know that's just way over the top.
I wish I knew the answer to that. What I have found is that if you have individual conversations and you're able to personalize the stories, that's where you make a difference. My mom is an avid Fox News watcher. And so I love her. immensely. But the point is, a couple of years ago, I had my ACL replaced. I was in bed for 2 weeks. She came to take care of me. She was very excited about it. But at that time, we were running Afghan asylum clinics in my office. We filed 70 asylum applications, and I'm the only attorney in my office, so it took a village to get us all together. And my mom came, and I said, okay, this first week that you're here, will you make copies, and will you help out? She's like, sure, no problem. And then the second Saturday that she was there, I'm like, do you want to meet with someone? Because in the clinics, we would have like 6 people at a time. They would be interviewed by other lawyers or members of the community, volunteers that I had, to get their stories. So then I could process the application for them. And so she said, okay. She was super nervous. But I found an applicant who was tall, attractive, young, and he spoke English. And I said, okay, Mom, this guy is for you. You go talk to him. 3 hours later, she was a changed woman. She was like, I had no idea. She's like, can I talk to my church ladies about this? And I'm like, yeah, you can't use names, because he had been in the Afghan Air Force. His wife was still in Afghanistan. But I think, well, that's not combating the mistruths. I think combating it with true stories is where you go, and you share those personal stories with people. Of course. Yes.
Back to my woman from Honduras for just a second. Have you heard of any changes to what would be the appeal process if she does not withdraw her case and loses and they issue a deportation order? Of course, her fear is there's a van sitting outside the courthouse, and me too, like, it's pretty legit fear.
Yeah.
But are the appeals, do you think, still going to work the way they have been?
So the question is about appeals in immigration court. So sometimes a win in immigration law is buying time. You may not win the long-term case, but you can keep someone here for as long as possible. So with the appeal process, what happens is you get ordered deported at the end of your trial. You have 30 days to appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Again, this is an office in DC. It's all paper-based arguments. There's no trial again, but they review the arguments to see if there was, miscarriage of justice or misinterpretation of the law. Those appeals right now go from 3 to 8 years to get decided. So she could buy her time that way. And hope for a better administration, better laws, and then even past that, depending on the case, you can do a petition for review with the Fifth Circuit at federal court, which will again take several years. And then maybe by then she has a U.S. citizen child who's 21 and can help her, may find the love of her life who's a U.S. citizen. In my world, working with survivors of domestic violence and violent crimes, you hope and pray that nothing bad happens to her, but if she is the victim of an armed robbery, she might have an opportunity there. I'm not saying she should go hang out in bad neighborhoods, but a lot of life can happen between now and then. Yeah.
What's the difference between naturalized citizen and just birth citizenship?
Yeah. So good question. Difference between a naturalized citizen and someone who's a citizen by birth. So citizen by birth is, the United States is unique. Not a lot of countries recognize, if you're born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen. There's a few exceptions, like if you're born to parents who are ambassadors, then you're not automatically a U.S. citizen if you're born here. But that is stable, solid, that cannot be taken away. You can revoke it. For example, if you want to go live in another country and not pay taxes, I think Tina Turner did that, for example. But naturalization is the process of becoming a U.S. citizen. And so that would be someone who's filed an application and who passes a civics exam and an English exam. I'm sorry, in the back, do you mind going? Or is there a question? Can I?
Okay.
No, it's fine.
No, I'm sorry, but okay, I just Sarah, how you feel to have, you supposed to have your birth certificate, the copy of the birth certificate you have. How do you feel about that?
Can I answer that after I finish answering this other? Okay, perfect. So with naturalization, they go through the process, they get a certificate. The only way to revoke that is to go through the federal court system. It should be stable, they should be fine, but they are people who were not born here, who have gone through the process to become citizens. Does that?
So Trump would possibly change that, people who become citizens?
So that's one thing that Trump has talked about doing. I don't think he'll be successful in it. But again, it's just one of those things that he uses to incite fear and create chaos in the community so that people may not apply for citizenship, which would actually be to their advantage because that's the ultimate protection. So yes. I'm sorry, thank you.
I'm sorry, I was talking, but, okay, I just have how she feel about to have her copy of her birth certificate and her card. She doesn't feel okay. What I have to have a copy of my citizenship. You see my point?
So why should you have to carry around your documents if you're a U.S. citizen? Like, why? And that's tough, if you look different, sound different, it's like you shouldn't be placed with a heavier burden because you are a U.S. citizen. But, what I will say is that I have seen U.S. citizens deported by accident because they didn't have documents on them to prove their citizenship. So is it an inconvenience? Is it an injustice that they should carry those documents? Yes, absolutely. Does it make a lot of sense to carry those documents just for a worst case scenario? Yes, absolutely. Because I think the consequences of not doing it are just so severe. And, you get detained, let's say you get detained on a Friday evening, you're like, yeah, I'm a U.S. citizen. Well, you're going to be detained through at least Monday because there's no judge who's going to look at your documents. So if you have the document on you in the moment, then you're just all that much better off.
Passport card. I mean, like you said, it's really silly that we should have this, but this is a photo ID. And I always told my late wife, because she was a naturalized citizen, to carry her passport with her. Because that's unjust, but it's protection.
Correct. And what I will say too is if you are pulled over in a traffic situation, if you have your license on you, that should be connected with, it's called the SAVE system, so that they could run your data to see that you are a U.S. citizen. But the SAVE system is not perfect. No government system is perfect with their data. So again, it's just an extra line of protection because in most states, not all, you have to be, documented with either a work permit or a green card or be a citizen to get a license. But like a license, for example, from New Mexico is not going to carry much weight to tell someone that you have status because in New Mexico you don't have to have status to get a license. So again, it's so tricky. Yes.
So what kind of documents would you suggest? A passport? Actual citizenship papers? What would you suggest?
So for someone who has gone through the system, I would definitely recommend carrying, a copy of the certificate of naturalization or a copy of the biographic page of a U.S. passport. I don't think you need the original on you at all times, but having the copy will at least give enough cause for a law enforcement agent to say, oh, yeah, you're a U.S. citizen, you're fine. But then if you are someone who is going through the system and has a work card, has a green card, those original documents should be on you at all times. All right, yes?
Is an international driver's license respected by law enforcement across the U.S.?
No, so international driver's licenses, no, they are not. They're fine if you're a tourist and, it's valid while you're in valid immigration status. So if you come as a tourist, if you're from Europe or a country where we have the visa waiver program, you're allowed in for 90 days. So your international license is only valid for those 90 days. Even though it may be valid for 5 years, U.S. law enforcement will only look at it as being valid while you are in legal status here.
What about in the case of students at universities?
So with students, in terms of having an international license, they should get a local license. They should get a license in the state where they reside.
So their license will not be respected even during their time as a student?
I would say you're asking a lot of local law enforcement, and I don't have a lot of faith in that, just to be blunt. They don't see them very often. And so what they will say is that if you are residing in an international student, even though they're not in the United States permanently, they are residing here, right? So that if you're here in Georgia, I believe it's 30 days, you should get a state-issued license. So if they're here long-term, like 4 years as a student, they should get a license here.
Would international students be aware of that requirement?
So international students always have an international student advisor. There's an international student office at every university. They have to administer the F1 program CVIS. And then with that, they should be doing presentations. When I was at KU, I ran orientation for new international students. And we always included information on driver's license, healthcare, and other things. But yeah, it's something that should be covered with orientation. Yes?
So, back to the kind of like the driving stuff. I have a license, correct? You said this earlier, but if you are in the vehicle with someone who maybe does not have status and everything, then they let you go case. Sorry, deeper into your case. So, for family members who don't have licenses or are driving on foreign licenses that are no longer valid, how do you just take the risk? Basically, like how do you react?
Yeah, everyone has their own risk tolerance, and sometimes you just don't have a choice. You have to take a child to school, to the doctor, you have to go to work, you have to earn an income, support your family, and every time you get in the car, that's a risk. But yeah, it's so scary. So, you know, we can have another conversation offline about this. I've got my contact information out there too, you know, about specifics for your family. I'd be happy to do that. But yeah, every time, it's scary. I know that there are, you know, people will Uber. I saw, you know, talk to people who started to use Uber a lot more under the Trump administration, version 1. There are, you know, a lot of like local taxi services that cater to the community who, you know, will drive people around, but that's so expensive. But again, it's the risk tolerance that everyone has to deal with. All right. Anything else? All right. Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with, or maybe heard of Detective Sergeant Matt Thornton?
I do not.
Mount Zion Police Department in Illinois. He's a 20-year guy. A crusader trying to clean up police behavior, particularly on traffic stops and other incidental occurrences. And he's a guy worth Googling, Detective Sergeant Matt Thornton.
All right. I'm glad to jot it down. Thank you. All right. So again, my information is out there. Again, even though I practice in Georgia, I have clients from all around the country. I am able to give immigration advice to anybody around the country. We do Zoom consultations. So yes, I'm in Georgia, but I am here for you. Anything that y'all need, contact me. Becky will find me as well. My dad, stepmom will always know where to find me. So we are good. Thank you again for your time, for caring. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becky, for organizing this. Thank you, Tracie. Thank you, Tracie, for this informative event.